what you're thinking. I've had those thoughts a million times. I can see the question that's behind your eyes. Oh, you're searching for your peace of mind. Now listen up to this truth. You are me and I am you. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. I know your life, I felt your pain. I know your joys and your shames. Sometimes it feels like life walks over you, or like you're a penny on the ground. But either on the ground or in your purse, the smallest piece still holds its worth. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Worthy of love, worthy of life, worthy of saying no when something don't feel right. This is a song for you, for all the ups and downs that life will put you through. Oh, so listen up to this truth. You are me and I am you. Every one of us is worthy. Yeah, baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Every one of us is worthy. Every one of us is worthy.
Good evening and welcome. I will provide instructions for Spanish interpretation. Buenas noches y bienvenidos. Es un gusto tenerlos con nosotros esta noche. Si desean escuchar este evento en el idioma español, por favor llamen al número de teléfono 844-857-5555. Voy a repetir el número de teléfono. Es 844-857-5555. Una vez que llamen ahí, les va a pedir un código de acceso. Por favor, ingresen el número 811-7900. El código de acceso es 811-7900. Al final deben de ingresar el numeral o la estrella. Muchas gracias y que disfruten esta noche.
Welcome. To access closed captioning, please click on the icon on the bottom right hand of your Zoom screen that says CC/live transcript. Again, to access closed captioning, please click on the icon on the bottom right hand of your Zoom screen that says CC/live transcript. We also have Spanish and ASL interpretation. Accessibility is a huge part of the work that we do, and we want to make sure that these spaces are accessible for everyone. It is so good to be back with you all for another episode of Survivor Healing Series, Disruptors Edition. We are so honored to be co-creating this space with you. As survivors and survivor advocates, we know that the work to end sexual violence is a daily commitment, and this series is one reminder of the many ways we can step up to disrupt. We have talked about the role of therapy and mental health in disrupting sexual violence, unpacking familial trauma and moving through healing, and tonight we are going to talk about disrupting rape culture amongst youth. This space is a weekly gathering for us to come home to ourselves and learn strategies that help us in supporting our healing journey and in stepping up as disruptors. My name is Venkayla Haynes, and I'm your host/moderator. I'm a survivor, organizer, and advocate who has been doing this work for the last 8 years, with a direct focus on HBCU students and K-12 schools in low-income areas. As someone who has experienced harm, I am committed to disrupting rape culture, to make sure survivors, especially marginalized folks, have the resources and access to the support that they need. I've worked with a host of local and national organizations to fight against legislation that is harmful to survivors, and I'm very passionate about the work that I do. Anytime I do this work, I always keep in mind my why. And my why is to always make sure that another Black girl who experiences the same thing as me has the resources and support that she needs. Tonight is an opportunity for us to have some real talk. And when I say real, I mean open, honest, and transparent. It is our brave space to learn how to disrupt rape culture and show up for the survivors in our lives. Get real about how hard it can be to do so because this journey is hard. And learn new tools so we can build toward our freedom dreams. Tonight, you might feel inspired and empowered after our discussion. You might also feel anger, fear, guilt, and shame. All of that is accepted here because all of that is valid. You deserve the space to be in your journey, whatever it looks like. If you feel triggered or otherwise feel the need to step away, we will not take offense to that. We encourage you to take care of yourself. This session will be recorded and available on Me Too's Facebook and YouTube page. It will be here when you are ready to view it. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Shashina Bray to lead us in a grounding exercise. Shashina is Me Too's Director of Programs and is a mother, therapist, activist, and educator. As we build our understanding of the capacity as disruptors each week, we will also share healing practices, tools, and exercises to add to our toolkit. Grounding exercises are important to come back to and center and be in the present. And Shashina is going to lead us through a practice we can access at any time to connect with our breath and pay closer attention to our bodies. Shashina, take it away.
Thank you, Venkayla, for the lovely introduction. Peace and greetings, everyone. I hope that you are as well as you can be in this moment. If you've been with us the first 2 weeks of our series, you know that we started with practicing or retraining ourselves how to breathe by learning how to rebreathe from the diaphragm. Last week, we learned how to connect our breath with noticing in the body. And this week, we're going to continue the noticing by doing a practice that you all can do on your own, which is a body scan. This is a really great practice to support you in grounding, to support you in noticing what may be going on in your body so that you can better address it. It's also a great way to find relaxation. So there is a body scan script available to you in this week's workbook. And as a reminder, the entire workbook will be available at the end of our series. So wherever you find yourself, whether seated or lying down, I encourage you to find a tall spine. Relaxing your shoulders where possible if you're seated. Pulling back through your ears so that your chin is parallel with the floor. Allowing your arms to fall against your body or against whatever surface you're lying on. There's an invitation to close your eyes if you like, or perhaps you'd like to lower your gaze. With your eyes closed or your gaze lowered, body attentive, I invite you to bring awareness to your feet. Notice these amazing feet that do so much for you. And just notice where you might be holding or tensing in the feet at all. Can you use your next exhale to support you in releasing that tension? Allow your awareness to move up your legs, to your thighs and calves. And again, notice what tension may be there. Perhaps you're also noticing where your body's in contact with the chair or bed. Noticing what it feels like to be held. And if you notice any tension, can you release it? Can you relax the muscles to sit more deeply or to lay more heavily? Allow your awareness to float up from your legs to your chest and upper back. And again, notice what may be there. The heart has a lot of stories to tell. So notice what sensations may come up as you bring your awareness to your chest, your shoulders, upper back. Can you allow your shoulders to relax? Can you loosen any muscles you may be holding in your back? Can you soften your belly while you're here? Moving your awareness down your arms. Notice where you may be holding in your upper arms, lower arms, and hands. Allow your hands to become light or perhaps heavy against your body as you continue to breathe. Moving your awareness all the way up the body to your face. Notice the sensation here. Notice where you may be holding. Can you release the muscles around your mouth, around your nose, around your eyes? Can you allow your face to soften? Perhaps even allowing your jaw to part. And take a few more breaths here as we bring this body scan practice to a close. Without doing anything, just check back in and see if tension has returned to some part of your body. And gently use your exhale to support you in releasing that tension. And we'll close with 3 breaths together, breathing in and out through the nose. Breathing in and fill up. Exhale, let it go. Breathing in, fill up. Exhale, let it go. Taking the deepest breath you've taken all day long. Inhale, fill up. Retain your breath for a moment. Notice it. And when you're ready, sigh it out. Beautiful. Just take a moment to notice the effects of your practice. And take whatever felt good here with you and leave behind the rest. Thank you.
Thank you for leading us in that practice, Shashina. I hope that helped you all arrive at this moment to have this difficult conversation. For this series, we wanted to co-create and hold a brave space together. And that means each of us taking responsibility for the health and well-being of the collective. Our agreements are as follows. 1, respect the space. 2, no judgment zone. Every step you take towards your healing is an act of courage. As our panelists share their wisdom and stories, let us approach the conversation with curiosity and compassion for them, for ourselves, and for each other. 3, lean into curiosity. Tonight, the chat box is open for asking questions and being in community with each other. We ask that you connect with each other, affirm what is being said, and seek out resources to support your healing journeys. 4, ask for support. We have expert healing specialists moderating the chat. Please reach out to them if you would like to find resources in healing in your community. Please leave it to them to answer any concerns or requests for resources that are raised in the chat. They are there so that you can focus on being present with the conversation and with one another. As for our resources, tonight we encourage you to take care of yourself. If you feel triggered or need to otherwise step away, please do so. We have a virtual healing room that you find on Facebook and in the Zoom chat. By clicking on the different images, you will be able to be transported to various resources and activities. You can also go to metoomovement.org. Movement is spelled MVMT to access the library and healing resources. Again, that is metoomovement.org. Movement is spelled MVMT.org. So let's get into it. Tonight's conversation centers 2 incredible youth serving organizations working to build the collective power of girls and women as they challenge oppressive systems that marginalize Black girlhood in particular. We are joined by Brianna Baker, founder and executive director of Justice for Black Girls, an organization dedicated to expanding global knowledge of the ways US-based systems of power respond to and perpetuate the abuse of Black girls in schools, in prisons, and in protests. Baker is a social justice educator, scholar, and juvenile justice advocate who is fervent about creating spaces that unconditionally affirm Black girlhood and brilliance. And Michelle Grier, Chief Program Officer at Girls for Gender Equity, an intergenerational organization committed to the physical, psychological, social, and economic development of girls and women. Grier is a social justice worker and Black feminist committed to liberatory healing practices. Her current commitments are focused on working alongside advocates and Black, Indigenous people of color, mainly youth survivors, to address racial and gender-based violence. Together, we will consider the role of youth in disrupting sexual violence and share strategies for us to co-create similar spaces for the young people in our lives to organize, realize their power, and build toward the collective future dreams. So let's just jump right into it. I would love to get us started about having each of you introduce yourselves and share your why. What is your reason for doing this work?
I'll start. Okay, so first, super honored to be here today. This is such a beautiful space, so thank you for curating. And when I think about, well, first, let me introduce myself. I'm Brianna Baker, founder and executive director of Justice for Black Girls. And again, super honored to be here. When I think about what grounds me in this work, it's a few things, right? First is the audacity of my ancestors that empowers me to do this work. And knowing that when we say things like we're our ancestors' wildest dream, that they did not dream of us just resisting oppression, right? They dreamed of us living liberated lives. And so when I think about what liberation means, it means unabashed wholeness, right? It means that I'm able to be my fullest and most authentic self, right? And that I'm able to live free from harm, right? And so when I'm thinking about those things and I think about the work that requires us to walk in wholeness and chase wholeness, that is something that grounds me in this work. Next, I think about disrespectability and this idea that we're disrespecting the systems that disrespect us, right? And so that grounds me in this work, right? And then lastly, I think about my own healing and liberation and imagination, right? In the words of like R.G. Lord, poetry is not a luxury, right? And so I think about what I thought was a luxury that I know now isn't. And so those are the things that ground me in this work, is knowing that my ancestors were audacious, knowing that I have a right to disrespect the systems that disrespect me, and that my healing and liberation is not a luxury.
Absolutely. Michelle?
Thank you too for letting me be here today. I'm so excited to be in this conversation, especially with Brianna. And I think like sometimes I just go and I say like a bell hooks kind of love. That's what brings me to this work. And to doing this alongside folks that look like me, have the same experience as me, and then with young people because they inspire me. And not just in a, oh, the youth inspire me kind of way, but literally sitting down and being like, that's genius. Other folks need to see that. And how can I help amplify that message? And so when I think about a bell hooks kind of love, it's really seeing people, it's being in it with them, it's connecting, it's organizing, it's shifting power dynamics. It has to be one that addresses and eradicates the oppressive factors that are in our life. And then I think about the work that she's done around intergenerational trauma. So when I say intergenerational, across age groups, so that I can have the conversation with my grandma, my mom, and myself. So knowing what my survivorship story looked like, that when I came forward to people, all these other people did have a moment to say me too. And then there also was like that, well, you should have known better, or there wasn't that love for ourselves to know that that wasn't the way that it should be. And so then coming into social work and wanting to do work with my folks, and specifically being a school social worker, seeing that there were so many lacks of supports for the young people, and that when it did come out about their survivorship stories, that then their ability to articulate how they wanted to engage in their healing was removed from them. And so it's like right away, I think adults wanting to protect, I think adults wanting to love them in the way that we think they should be loved, took away the agency and the ability for them to really name what they needed in those moments. And oftentimes, I think caused a little bit more harm. And so coming to specifically like this work at Girls for Gender Equity is working alongside young people to really cultivate spaces where they can articulate what their healing is. And then I get a little bit of a moment to come here, to come to other places that maybe they're not being heard, and amplify that message.
Yeah, I think that's very important, because when you see social media and you see conversations around sexual violence, especially with Me Too, you don't oftentimes see young people sharing their stories publicly or making their stories heard or their stories being in the headlines. You oftentimes see adults. So my question to you all is, why is it important for young people to get involved in the movement to end sexual violence? And what do you want adults to understand when it comes to young people navigating those spaces when it comes to the issue of sexual violence?
Yeah, I think for me, I could understand the reluctancy because for me, as someone that works with youth and is fervent on moving from just empowerment spaces, but spaces where youth really have power, right, to make decisions on their behalf. You think it's not children's labor, right? Their freedom work should not be their labor. We think as adults, it's our responsibility, right, to do this work. And we oftentimes are coming with a protective spirit, right? But the beautiful and brilliant thing about young people is that they have so much wisdom already. And sometimes we're more in their way than assisting them. And so when we think about centering youth, it really comes with any concept. When you think about movements around resistance and liberation, those most affected should be in front, right? Those most affected don't need someone else to speak for them, right? They need to be the experts and theorists of their own experience. And so when we think about elevating the voices of youth activists and youth survivors, that work is critically important because they have much to teach us, right? They are expanders of global knowledge, right? And so our movement is lacking if we're not centering the voices of Black girls, of youth survivors. And so the truth of the matter is that we have no choice but to center them in this movement, but to center them in this fight, because we are losing if we're not taking in their perspective and if we're not including their voices.
So what steps can we take exactly to center their voices? How does that process start?
Well, I think holistic listening is a good way to start, right? So again, yes, we want to be protective and those sort of things, but sometimes you have to check yourself, put on your own airbag, slow down, and make space so that you can hear and listen. There is so much that is provided in terms of giving to young people, like, oh, this is a prevention program and we're going to give you this information, but not making space for them to actually say, like, this is what I'm experiencing. This is how I want to talk about this, or this is how this shows up. So just places to have authentic, vulnerable conversations where there's a lack of judgment. So it's okay if you're engaging in sex. It's okay if you have pleasure and you are starting to understand your body and want to talk about that pleasure. Like, you should be able to have the space to name that and talk about that. And then you should be able to have the space to name and talk about the things that don't feel so great and that you have questions about and you're worried about. And so when we create that container, that's definitely a good start. I also think that starting young is important because we're also naming, what does it mean to be a self-advocate and what does it mean to be engaged in community? And then that accountability piece. So we can't address racism and we can't address sexism without addressing the ways in which that power is taken away from folks. And sexual abuse is one of the ways in which power is taken over people. And so we have to be able to incorporate that into our language, our freedom language, and our liberation work to be able to name what the alternatives are to that. And so I do think there's some education component there too.
Yeah, I completely agree with Michelle there. I think that the work is on adults to create the framework for young people to be able to effectively and meaningfully have the discussions. And it's on us to create spaces, like Michelle said, that expose certain young survivors, young girls in general, to what, again, pleasure looks like outside of their first experience with a partner, to what bodily autonomy looks like, to all sorts of different educations that will arm them with the materials and understandings of themselves to then become self-advocates.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with creating these safe spaces, because as someone who works with K through 12 schools, having these conversations on sexual violence, on boundaries, sex ed, I think it's very important to have those safe spaces. So for me, when speaking to kids, and this is not just girls, but boys, children that are non-binary, children that are trans, just making sure that they know that no question is sort of like a quote unquote crazy question. Like, you can ask me anything. This is a safe space for us to be open, vulnerable, give you the resources and support that you need. And from creating that space, we actually had students that came forward about their stories, students that were able to get resources, get support. So I definitely agree that making sure that we have those safe spaces for children without judgment is a very, very important role in this movement. So for our next question, can you speak to the unique experiences of disrupting rape culture, sexual violence among youth? What challenges and opportunities exist when navigating sexual violence with young people?
Oof, this is a big question, right? So I'm like, we need to take this one in parts. Do you want to start, Brianna?
Oh, okay. I didn't know
I
you were
saw
going
you
to start.
came off mute too. I was gonna start, but then I like saw you come off mute too, and so.
Oh, no. I'm listening. I'm just listening.
So I think in terms of things that we're thinking about for what becomes the challenge, I'll start there.
Mm-hmm.
Challenges. I think, you can never go as fast as white
Right.
supremacist culture and resourcing. And so those feel like challenges that I think about this time in this moment when we're all trying to figure out how to be together during COVID 19 and being in spaces together. And there's a lot of healing that needs to get done, and healing does not take, is not slow. It is
Right.
not linear. And so some of that challenge is that even when you named what do we need to do in holding that space, the adults also have to do their own healing work.
Right.
To be able to hold that space. And so how do we get all of the information out to folks? How do we break down, how do we work as fast as the folks who are working against us, for lack of a better word, to get to those young folks, to get them the resources, to make sure the resources are there. Right now, I know a lot of the communities that are providing holistic services are taxed. There's a lot that's being asked of us in this time, and it is difficult to reach everyone. I do think some of the, and so that's broad, but also just real resourcing and how fast can we be. And I think some of where I've seen this work, and what I love also about working in groups, being able to lift up the experiences of other groups in different cities and states and this space too, is that there is more synergy and connection. It's sort of like the both and 6 and 1 half dozen of the other, as my grandmother would say, of the internet. Internet can be a harsh place. Internet can be a great place where we're getting connected. And so some of the beauty of this work is that we're also being able to bring young people together in ways that we haven't been able to before. They are bringing themselves together in ways that they haven't been able to before, accessing and creating movement spaces for themselves online, and sharing information in real time. And that's where my brain went right away, but I'll probably have more things after I listen in.
Yeah, I agree with those things completely. I think some of the biggest challenges that I've seen is just really this concept that we have to love Black girls better than we were loved in our girlhood and in our womanhood. And I think, and I know that sometimes we become perpetuants of harm, even when we don't mean to. So it's unlearning the ideas and values and beliefs that told us that for some reason our trauma was our fault, right? So it's a lot about releasing shame. And I think also in this work is capacity. I think sometimes we don't really do the work to ensure that when the conversation is opened, that we're able to offer some sort of support for the wound that we opened up within our discussion. So it's really, when we think about JBG having healing spaces and healing circles, is really having someone that's a licensed healer, right? Or someone that's a licensed psychotherapist, or someone that's present, so that if, you know, that person does, if they are triggered, right, if they are alarmed, right, that we have someone that's immediately available. And again, to everything Michelle's saying, you can have the resources, you can have the conversation, and still everyone's healing journey is so different. And so it really is making space for the complexity of healing, but just knowing that that you have to truly believe in healing and know that it's possible, and know that no matter how slow it goes, no matter how not linear it is, right, that we are progressing towards a space where Black girls can feel seen and embraced and whole and held.
Do you all ever find yourself in a space kind of trying to help youth distinguish love versus harm? Not only when it comes to adults, but also relationships, intimate partner violence. Like, do you always have to find yourself trying to help them arrive to that point to understand what love is versus what harm is?
Yes. Yes, definitely. Not just young people. I think, again,
Right.
it's that being able to know that you deserve it, balancing what is called negative self-talk. So when your brain gets clouded and it's like, oh, well, maybe this is what I deserve, or maybe I did do this, and
Right.
those sort of things, being able to have the moments to have a counter narrative, and to get enough of that counter narrative so you can have that. Because there's going to always be folks in community. There's going to be friends that call you their friends that are haters. There's going to be school folks, and there's all these systems. And so we're constantly working against that. I think the thing that I love about the Sisters in Strength program that we run at Girls for Gender Equity, it's a survivorship circle model. And we have young people who are in high school and just transitioning into college. And we don't require anyone to come in as a survivor. They might just want to be an advocate.
Right.
And what happens is that they start to hear from other folks, their stories and their understanding and concepts of love, and start to come to the awareness that what they are experiencing isn't what they want, right? And so you grow, and you grow in your understanding of what you want, what you need, and what love means and can look like for you. And being in that circle where you're experiencing love from siblings and sisters also helps you to practice that. And so we use a restorative model. Like, if I'm having a moment with you, I also know what it looks like to have that repair work. Because being in relationship, going back to this bell hooks kind of love, also means that I'm trusting you to be in this with me. I'm trusting you to figure out how to love me and for us to move this forward. So we definitely have that conversation. And I think it's really important for them to have it together. It can't just be, oh, Michelle came in today and is telling us like our boo is not the thing, right? Like, we work on that. And it's not just a one-time statement or me pushing them away, but like us unpacking and really delving into what that relationship is offering to them. And that's not just romantic relationships, that's also friendships. And being okay that friendships go in waves. And sometimes you might have a good friend for 4 years, it might shift, you might go back and forth. And is it serving you? And is it helping you to get to where you want to be?
Yeah, thank you for that, Michelle. I know a lot in our work, we start on a macro level, and our girls start to name the abuse that they have faced, not just from friends and family, but just from society, and the ways that their bodies are adultified and sexualized, and the ways that their bodies are policed, and the ways that they are victims of a world that would rather render them disposable and unworthy and unlovable than embraced. And so they think about those macro experiences, which then lend themselves to realize that the way they've been treated in personal relationships are reflective of that, right? And so we have girls on all sorts of the spectrum where they are able to immediately identify that their life has been characterized by abuse in some way, shape, or form. And then we have others that, again, in conversation and in community, rooted in love and liberation, they're able to recognize that they no longer that no longer serves them, and they're going to demand a world that honors their fullness and that honors their wholeness. So just supporting everything that Michelle is saying, is critical that we have these spaces so that they're able to identify that they're worth so much more. And I think that, and I know that this work is so crucial, because if not, you'll have generations of girls internalizing that this is all that they deserve. And we know that they are worthy of so much more. And we know that they are worthy of everything that is antithetical to abuse. And so this work requires that we have the conversations that ask girls to name what it means to be loved and liberated, and to imagine a love that gives them all the most beautiful feels.
Right.
And so that they're able to, again, become self-advocates and demanders of a world that honors their fullness.
So I know earlier, Brianna, that you mentioned that in this work, we have to take our time. We have to make sure we have these honest conversations and create these safe spaces, because we don't want to cause harm ourselves doing this work. So what are some of the best practices that adults can use when navigating these spaces when it comes to protection and connection with the youth in their lives? And when I say adults, I mean adults outside of this space, so outside of the sexual violence movement that don't do this work. What can adults who have children do outside of this space to make sure that their children are protected and they have that connection?
Yeah, I think the first thing that adults have to do is go on their own healing journey, so that you're fully
Right.
prepared to have the real conversations with your child when they come up. I've noticed that in doing this work requires parents to start digging a little bit deeper and unlearning some of the things that they've been taught, because as your baby girl or your baby boy goes to have conversations, and then they come to you and have questions, it sparks genuine and authentic conversation about your own experiences. So that's the first step. I think the first step is journeying with healing yourself, right? And then afterwards, right, just some resources that you're able to pull from, resource guides if you are unfamiliar, and different. I know All About Love is just a great book in general, right? To be thinking about by Bell Hooks, to be thinking about the way that you can distinguish love from harm, and you can have some macro levels and micro level conversations, right? And then obviously all of the resources available here, right? So that you can kind of pull from and make sense of them on your own. But I would offer that the biggest thing really is going on your healing journey first, because it's something that is never ending, right? And as you and your child are engaging in this conversation together, you can learn and grow.
Right.
I love all of that and agree. So I'll speak to the school-based side, to the service provider side, and then you have to do more than what's given to you right now. And then in addition, we have to train better. So the first part of that is, if you're coming into a school system, most likely you'll get one class, they'll mention it, it'll be a mandated reporter training, it'll be like, this is the protocol. It's not how to have that conversation with families. It's not how to hold that space for your young people and maintain some level of confidentiality. Sometimes these things come out and the entire school knows before the end of the day, right? And so we have to do better by our young people in terms of the systems that we have to respond to when they're experiencing sexual harassment, when they're experiencing sexual violence, when they're experiencing bullying. The list can go on. And so really starting to shift our schools to spaces that see that and have a healing informed practice from the beginning, and supporting our teachers and administrators in understanding how to do that. Because so many times they're not getting the training and the resourcing to do that ahead of time. And then it's reactive. And we see that a lot right now as we're managing grief and coming back into space together. And so I think that's really important. And then the other side of that, I think, is also folks have to acknowledge, again, very similar to parents, where they're at and what that means for them. And there's this thing that I think that adults who are supporting young people have, where they have their own dreams and aspirations and sort of want to create young people in their image, sort of thing. And I think you got to let that go, right? Yeah. Young people are their own people. And I think that's very hard. That's very hard to do. And so when young people decide to articulate their sexuality, their gender, who they want to be and who they are, what their aspirations and dreams are, what does it look like to like allow a little bit more space for us to grieve and let go of what we had planned for them, and then start to incorporate their dreams for themselves. And that definitely takes intentionality, that takes work. And sometimes it takes seeing how other people have managed that, because we don't have very many models for parenting alongside and supporting alongside in a holistic way. And I don't mean models just from our family members, but I also mean like home ec isn't the end all be all to how to raise a family and then how to become an educator and those sort of things. So doing that and then creating more training for that, that's holistic.
I love that you said that we have to allow children to be who they are and not try to like push them to create this image of what we have in our head. And that also goes to Brianna's point about making sure that we heal before doing this work as adults, or heal before engaging in this conversation, because you can't continue to pour into something or someone when you have an empty cup of yourself. Is going to create burnout. Self-care is important. So just making sure that you're taking care of yourself and centering yourself, making sure that you're healed before you get engaged in these conversations. And also going off your point of mentioning schools, in addition to training teachers and making sure that the resources are there, I would definitely recommend vetting teachers as well, because I know there was a report in Chicago of the sexual violence cases that they had in Chicago public schools. And some of these teachers were traveling from outside states after they got fired, traveling to outside states, going to different schools. And that information of the violence that they perpetuated was not reported to the next school that they were going to. So making sure that we communicate that information to keep children safe, because we're not doing anything but adding to the cycle. When we just not sitting over this information, not making sure children are safe, not making sure that these teachers are being held accountable for their actions, just making sure that we have those conversations as well when it comes to vetting these teachers, checking their record, getting this information from school that they're transferring from, because that can put more children in danger, definitely. So what have you all noticed about the ways adults unintentionally silence youth voices? So what are some things that adults do that you've noticed that can silence youth voices?
I think Michelle really started diving into this question when she talked about adults' inability to allow children to just be their full authentic selves. And not only that, but projecting who we would like them to be instead of honoring who they are. I think adults just really have to move out the way and give permission. I think the best thing that we can do is affirm every element of children. I think oftentimes we tell children that only parts of themselves will get them where they need to go. And the truth is every part of them will get them where they need to go. And so we need to honor every facet of their identity, right? I think that what I've seen adults do, and much like what Michelle had already spoke to, is try to convince a child that another part of them or another expression of them is better suited for them to be successful, or better suited for them to express themselves. And I know that as an adult, we have a tendency to do that. I think also as adults, we have to honor the inner children that live within us. And I think that will allow us to connect closer to children that we work with, right? We don't have to throw any parts of ourselves away in order to connect with children. And what I mean by that is that I have a 7-year-old self, 8-year-old self, 9-year-old self, 10-year-old self, 13-year-old self, 16, right? And all of them have different connections, right? And so I don't have to live through a child, right? I can honor the inner child that lives in me. And so if we really as adults did the work to honor the inner children that exist within us still, I believe that it would be easier for us to allow that child to be, right? And so I think that when we feel this connection or energy or desire, right, to live through another child, we have to dig deep and figure out what part of us did we try to throw away, and how can we grab that back and honor her or him, right? And so I know that's some of the biggest things that I see within this work is just our inability to let go.
It's beautiful. I love like digging back into play as a way of connecting and into our inner child. I think part of this is also all the things we do to ourselves. I already, and naming the negative self-talk, the blaming, right? I know for myself that when I was coming into my healing journey, I had so much blame on myself. Oh, if I had done this, or if I had done that. And then that gets put onto young people. Well, you shouldn't have gone this way, or you shouldn't have worn that. or if you had done, these sort of things, or even when you were talking and naming these adults in schools, there sometimes with the dynamic, it's, well, your teachers are the right ones. What did you do wrong? Right. And so we have to get better at, in that term, listening and making space. And that might be unintentional. It might just be, we grew up in a society where, or culture where you listen and you honor the adult in the space. And so if that is a part of your experience, and then, but that person is the one who's causing you harm, how do you name that? How do you cultivate
Right.
that? And that can just be something that's really simple. It's because that's how everyone in your community names that person or speaks to that person. So being able to create a level of teaching, when can you speak up? When is it important to be able to name that something's happening to you? And I don't want to make it seem like there aren't boundaries that need to be set or guidance that needs to happen for young people. I think most of the time folks are looking for guidance and also looking for, how can I be as creative within this boundary as I'm starting to come into my own, right? So creating a safe container to be as creative and as authentic as you want to be. So it's not just thinking of that as we're naming, like, what can parents and adults be doing? It's not getting rid of all the rules, but it's being able to provide some support for what they can do. And in this way of playing, I also think being vulnerable together is also important. I don't just need you to come to me with my story. Let me show you what it looks like when I'm sad. Let me show you what it looks like when I'm in my healing, and be authentic to that. And I think sometimes what happens is maybe something's going on for the adult that maybe, I have to work at night and I might not see you, and you might be home by yourself, or I leave you with someone, and there's that level of maybe needing to have some other conversations and being able to even work through that plan together, which could create more space for you, interrogating safety in those moments and creating more openness.
Yeah. And last thing I just wanted to add, thank you again for that, Michelle, is I think sometimes we have issues implementing restorative justice on micro level. So I think when it comes time to like micro level, we can think, okay, what are alternatives to suspension, and what are alternatives to expulsion, and what are alternatives to incarceration? But restorative justice also looks like having an interaction with a child where you don't think she was as respectful as you would have liked, and leaning in with love, right? And not rendering a child disposable because of her tone, right? And because you found her to be defiant or disrespectful, right? What is it like in those moments where she's expressing herself and you're honoring her ability to express herself? And again, like Michelle said, creating a container that allows her to be safe enough to express herself while you still are rooted in accountability, and, showing her how she should love herself better and love you better by, being respectful and all of those things. But I think that it gets tricky for folks to really operationalize restorative justice in interpersonal relationships with girls that are dealing with harm, right? Because those conversations are hard, right? And so it's not all rainbows, and you might, it might be a difficult conversation. You might get talked to in a way that you've never been talked to before. But you have to really lean in to these terms and these mantras that we claim and that we cling to in larger spaces when you're having those interpersonal conversations.
I love that you named that, talking about girls in suspension, or girls who are sent to the juvenile justice system. That ties into the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. And I was actually someone who experienced that. When I was younger, I experienced sexual abuse for about 5 years. And when I went to school, I would get angry, I would get in fights, but no one ever asked me what was going on at home. Am I okay? What do I need? The immediate response was, this child needs to be suspended. This child needs to be out of our school. So how do we even get to that point where we're asking children, hey, are you okay? Hey, what do you need? Hey, what's going on at home? Why are you responding this way? Instead of just criminalizing them. So my question to you all is, what advice do you have for young people who have already experienced harm and they are looking to navigate their healing journey and looking for ways to cope?
Some of the greatest advice that I can offer now is finding an adult advocate. As much as I would love to be able to say that I can equip Black girls in particular with all of the vernacular and resources they need, what I know about our world is that again, they would rather adultify Black girls than honor Black girls. And so
Absolutely.
oftentimes Black girls are criminalized for just speaking up and saying and speaking truth to power, right? And so what I know is that we as adults can sometimes prevent further harm in their circumstance being exacerbated by being an advocate. So my first advice is find an adult that you know cares and that you know can stand in the gap for you and have conversations with other adults before you try to do it. And now if you can't do that, then again, there are other resources for you as well. But the first step I would say is try to find an adult that you know cares so that we can do the work of standing in the gap so that you don't have to then be further criminalized, be further penalized because you're just articulating what needs to be heard for adults who are unwilling to listen. That's, I would say, the first step. Second step is then meeting with the person the person that you are, naming as your supporter and your advocate, and getting really honest and vulnerable with her, or him or whoever it is, right? And so that you can have those real conversations and you can be connected to the supports that you need and you can truly begin a journey with healing.
I agree with that very much. Being able to connect with someone so you don't have to feel like you're on your own. And then to also, and I think sometimes when you're on your own, that like the ways in which it becomes isolating can keep you from being able to move forward. And so I definitely think being able to connect with an advocate and someone in a life that's an adult. And if that isn't available, because sometimes that isn't, depending on what experience you're having, you might be, in foster care, in a group home, in incarcerated. And so I think there's tactics, there's maybe allies in that space that you begin to sort of figure out and name with. Also journaling and keeping your story for yourself, which, and that doesn't just have to be journaling, but some way that you can get it down and out and externalize it. So getting it out of just from your brain and your heart and getting it somewhere else, so maybe it can be held somewhere else for a while. And then continuing to try, right? You might go to someone the first time, and this is real to what we're naming, that like people still don't believe that Black girls, Black women, cis and trans, gender non-conforming young people and adults deserve the care. And so you might tell somebody once, they don't know how to deal with it. You might have to go and tell another person. You might have to rage. And I don't want to say that that's what you have to do, because you do not have to do that if you're not at that point in your journey. But if you're looking for support and the first person who looks to you, it might be one of those moments where you get it to, you take that moment, you take that pause, and then you figure out who might be the next person. And I say this as someone who was a school social worker. I say this as someone who had young folks who went to multiple different people in the school and spent years. Some of the young folks I worked with spent years trying to tell people and get support, and it took multiple times. So we're working on changing that. That's the plan. That's why we're here advocating for this. But I'm also naming that the adults that you might think are the ones, that might not be it. You might have to call a hotline, right? And there are so many out there. I know an anti-violence project, there's a Trevor project, there's a national assault, there's RAIN, right? And there's Me Too has so many resources. And so that can be another one where you can call, talk to someone, text with someone in real time, and be able to strategize around how you can also get more support and be heard. Because I think sometimes we want adults to show up for us. And as we were naming, sometimes they're not ready either. And that's just reality right now. And then there are all the other adults that are ready to show up for you.
Yeah.
So go there.
So I'm wondering how we navigate spaces when it comes to Black women and girls who are already criminalized, who are already in the system, because we know that the system does not have the proper resources and counseling. And also there's violence within the system itself. The system is inherently violent as well. So what can we do to navigate those spaces for women and girls who are already incarcerated and are only being subjected to more harm?
So I think that this is where we have to work on multiple levels. So being able to address the policies and the systemic change that needs to happen, in addition to providing the supports for our young people. So we work alongside multiple different partners who are working to end the criminalization of Black girls and young people here in the United States. And what that looks like is being able to introduce bills at the federal level, at the city and state level. It's also being able to have young people's stories be amplified in those spaces so people understand that it's an issue. And one of the things we know is that we don't have enough data and information about Black girls, so and young people. And so when we are having these moments, people are like, well, show us, or where can we get that? So we have information, we don't have necessarily all the specific information, and we need more resourcing to be able to do that. But I think people should know what their elected officials are doing about this issue. If you are able to vote, if you are able to advocate in that way, then holding them accountable to make this change, especially if you're someone who's working in this field and you're saying, I'm a provider, I might not like this law that I have to engage in as a part of my job. A way to change that is to ensure that your legislators are working actively to create a different system for your child protective services, for what the juvenile legal system looks like. And I think sometimes we disconnect ourselves from those spaces, not understanding that as those providers, as those people in that space, as parents, as young people, we can give testimony, we can vote on things, we can make suggestions. And so getting more informed about how to make that shift that isn't just about what we're doing in our day-to-day to support survivors. And we need more allies to step into that space, right? For me, I want young people who identify as Black to be able to have the space to heal and to work on that and do that as they need to. If they want to come along and advocate, that's great. Also, this is a great place for advocates and allies to step in. If you're naming yourself as an accomplice and an ally, like this is where you can come in, help vote, and help to shift these laws so that they're more holistic. And people are always like, well, we don't know what you need, da-da-da-da. I'm like, people have been raising this for so long. There's so much. And now that there's access to internet, these conversations, there's a whole lineage, there's a whole canon where you can get this information. And so getting educated and then supporting and making that macro level shift.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Michelle. And just to support what it is that you're saying and just name some resources and that are at the top of my brain, Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools by Monique W. Morris. If you're interested in reading that text, it really centers not just the school to confinement pathways and the ways that Black girls in particular experience confining structures in schools, but also the sexual abuse to prison pipeline and getting educated about what that looks like. Also, when you think about adultification and the data that offers that Black girls, especially between the ages of 5 to 14, are deemed less innocent, less needing of nurturing, more adult-like, more knowledgeable about sex, right? When we're thinking about macro examples of the criminalization and adultification of Black girls, we need to, as a society, as a nation, resist any structure that renders Black girls as anything other than a child, right? That renders survivors as anything other than just that, survivors, right? Far too often we're further perpetuating harm to girls, and particularly Black girls, right? And so we have to name that thing. And as Michelle was already eloquently saying, we have to resist on every level, right? This looks like the educator in school that sees their colleague exacerbating a fight instead of asking what happened, right? This looks like the adult that has a child come to them and tell them about sexual trauma and saying, well, what did you have on? Instead of saying, give me what can, really talking about this, right? And then it also looks like, of course, you standing by as you see House bills being discussed that are aiming to end school push out, and you not becoming aware or conscious or supportive of what it is that's happening. There's a national cry out again for the souls of Black girls as named in New York Times. And sometimes it feels like only Black women and girls are on the front lines. And so we really need all folks to be unconditionally concerned about the holistic well-being of Black girls. And we think about their holistic well-being in safe spaces in their homes, right? But also in prisons, right? And so every Black girl is worthy of a space where they can thrive and know that they are sacred and loved, right? In the words of Dr. Monique Morris. And so the onus is on all of us to ensure that we create the space that they've always deserved.
I love that we're talking about the sexual abuse prison pipeline and also having conversations around elected officials and raising awareness, because that we know that Centoya Brown was a huge victim of the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. And what kind of led to her release is pressuring elected officials to release her, social media campaigns, raising awareness, and organizers on the ground doing that work for over 10 years to get her release. So I think that's very important, because we do understand that over 50% of Black women and girls that are incarcerated have experienced some form of sexual or domestic violence. And a lot of them are punished for surviving, such as Centoya Brown. So I think that's very important to name, that in order to raise an awareness around the criminalization of Black girls, we have to make sure that we're pressuring these elected officials, raising awareness about these campaigns, giving resources and support, and how we could help them while they're criminalized, and also getting them out as well. So jumping to our next question, we know that Girls for Gender Equity and Justice for Black Girls make clear the importance of building power with girls and women to effectively change the systems that especially marginalize Black girlhood and begin building power towards our dreams. What does power building look like for you in your organization? What gems can you share with others who are seeking support with youth in harnessing their power toward community transformation? And I just want to make clear, when we talk about power, I also want to add in justice. So what does power and justice look like to you all when it comes to the work of your organization? And how can we share that with youth who are seeking support to build that power as well and transform their communities?
Okay. I didn't know if you were going for it. Sure. Yeah, every time someone says justice for Black girls, it's not just a rallying call.
Right.
It's a term of it's a mantra, right? It's a way of life. You're demanding that Black girls deserve better, right? And so every time someone says our name, they are declaring, or they're making that declaration in regards to Black girlhood. And so for us, it starts with our pledges to Black girl liberation. Every participant in our program is required to create a pledge to Black girl liberation that's personal to them. So it's about honoring that. It's about listing our community agreement and naming that Black girls are expanders of global knowledge, that we do not just internalize knowledge, but we are producers of knowledge, right? Knowing that we honor the wisdom that we bring into every space, and we honor the ancestors who have made room for us to live fuller lives. And so when we think about what justice and healing looks like in these spaces, we're thinking about, again, just giving Black girls permission to be. And so much of this work is about naming our trauma and our abuse, but I fervently believe that this work has to be so much more than that, and that it has to be about our lives and the way that we live, that Black girls can't just be visible when we're mourning us, right? But it has to be visible when we're living full and joyous lives. And so many folks don't even know what full and glorious Black girlhood looks like, right? We did a lot of work around Ma'Khia Bryant, and folks were, one of the largest questions we were getting was, how do we honor her? And how do we tell her story, right? How do you honor anyone beautifully, right? How do you, and so it's lost on folks how to honor innocence in childhood when the child is Black and when the child is a Black child. Right. But it's not lost on us. Right. JBG and GGE are very clear on what it means to honor the fullness of Black girls, and what it means to honor Black trans girls, and what it means to honor Black non-binary youth. Right. And so when we think about all of these folks, and when we think about the fullness of all of these identities, it's really about giving Black youth space to be their fullest and authentic selves without interruption, without apology, and under every condition.
Yes. Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes to all of that. Yes. Authentic selves. One in which we're also doing our healing. So GGE, we consider ourselves a Black feminist organization. We uplift that fully and unapologetically. And so what does that mean to then also bring young people along, but also understand that we're creating the space that we wanted to see as Black women, leaders, queer, identifying across all spectrums and intersections, immigrants, gender nonconforming, multiple different class levels and experiences of survivorship. And so in this moment coming together for us, harnessing power is being able to create that container that I was talking about, where we can have these dialogues, have these conversations, check one another, say, well, definitely, like, let us know what language should we be using? How should we be thinking about this? And be in dialogue, and then start to be able to have some space to not just rage, not just let people know what needs to change, but then also to imagine, what does it mean for us to be free? What does that look like? What is the alternative? Because if we get there, when we get there, people are going to ask us what that looks like. And if we're always in battle mode, we don't have the space to create something that's not in response to trauma, but is in response to the fullness of who we are. And what we know is that Black folk, Black women, Black non-binary folk, cis and trans, LGBTQ folk are wonderful and have had to adapt here in this country, but also have built so much throughout the entire world. And so the fullness of who we are, and being able to build around that is just going to be beautiful and wonderful. And it already is. And so when I think about this harnessing of power and justice, our young people right now, they're actively engaged in a campaign, the National Agenda for Black Girls. They've been pushing forward what they feel this federal government should be identifying in order to say that they're actually for them. They know that they're constituents. They know that they are in the space of having power, and that they are the ones who will be here on this earth and in this world for the next few years, building our different systems. And so they're working on that right now, and they're actively, like, they are fire. The other day I got to see them in action, and just the things that they're naming and claiming are important. And so I do think that that's a big part of harnessing power and justice. Is it's not me being here just speaking, it's them being able to speak when they want to. And then when they are like, no, we need adult allies to come up and speak, it's making sure that they have a whole, not just feeling the ancestors at their back, but also having a whole crew of people to support them in that.
So when we talk about building power, we understand that it takes a village, right? We know that all of us have to be involved in this movement. All of us have to educate ourselves. All of us have to be in community with one another. And we have to protect our communities. So how can youth be advocates for justice when it comes to sexual violence within their schools? What steps can they take within their schools with their administration to be advocates and build toward a safer campus?
Yeah, we've seen this happen, and we've seen some of the most powerful movements happen from student leaders in response to sexual violence. It's most beautiful, I find, when we create this beautiful container, right? And we give Black girls access to the resources and information, and they take it back to their schools, and they meet with their administrators, and they meet with their counselors, and they say, we need this here, right? And then they lead an initiative at their school that actively resist the policies and the procedures at their schools that don't serve them, that don't serve survivors, that don't honor sexual violence and what that looks like in real times, and they make real changes, right? We've had discussions about, in which I didn't even know existed, was that they are like, I guess, what is it that they said it was called? But there used to be some day where boys at the school would just
Booty tag.
Yes. Yep. Whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and they were able to name, resist, and eradicate, right, that day, right? And that's a big deal because it honors, their bodily autonomy, and it honors the power of their voice, and it honors all of these things. And so what we know about Black girls is that they're visionaries, right? And they're not just thinkers, but they're doers. And so when you give them the tools and the resources, they will make space in any space, right? And they will take up space and claim that space and claim ownership of their new understanding of their freedom and liberation. And so that's what this work is ultimately about. It's about equipping them with the tools for them to, again, move from disempowerment to power. And so they take the power to their schools, and they resist structures that interrupt or marginalize their girlhood and their experiences. And so that's when I find it to be most beautiful, when we think about Black girls doing that, when we think about youth at large doing that. And so to youth that are here, dig deep into the resources, dig deep into the research, and then take that information to your school leaders, and find someone, again, that's trusted at school, right? I would not argue or offer that you should go to the school leader or the administrator that you find to be most difficult, right? But find someone that can be an advocate and a supporter for you, a counselor to you, and someone that can be an advisor to what it is that you're building, because healing and justice and work happens in community, not in isolation. And so it's important that you create a team of folks, and there are going to be other people at the school that might identify with you, right, that will support you. Find that community that you can be supported by and lean into that, so that you're able to make real power moves at your school, in ways that create a safer learning environment for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it definitely has to happen in community, and everything that Brianna said, 100%. I think when I think about the outliers of this, it might be if you go to a religious school that doesn't believe in your identity. If you're in a place that can't uplift who you are, then that's when you check out our websites, right? Come to organizations that exist online, come to Me Too movement, because there is space and place for you to be able to find community there. Sometimes the young people that I worked with have been kicked out of their community, for lack of a better word. And so just know that there are places and spaces for you to come and be uplifted, and that you don't have to go to places that might not feel supportive of who you are. You don't have to go to the streets. That might happen. And also there's space to come out of that. And we're here waiting for you. And so I would just really want to hold and name that, because I think as we're talking about the school to prison pipeline, thinking about the ways in which sometimes schools and the places that are meant to be supportive of us just don't do that and don't see us in those moments. And then when we need to get out of that, then we have to, in that urgency, have to go somewhere else. And that also might not be the best support and safety. And so being able to do that. There's also places that we collaborate with, like the National Women's Law Center. We have a project that came out, 100 school districts, where we're working to push school districts to have more policies around sexual harassment and sexual violence in schools. So they're doing work ahead of time. And so there is a toolkit for young people if you want to bring that forward to schools. And the legacy of GGs that was created out of a response to folks who are experiencing sexual violence in their community, and then them going back and saying, hey, this is what we need to change, and them doing workshops for the community and having grassroots organizing. And so that's, inevitably we got us. There will always be Black people who make this space and who articulate what we need. And that's very real. And I think that now we're seeing that there are a few more folks who want to be in that with us. So being able to get educated on those resources. And then again, just everything that Brianna said, being able to work collectively with folks.
So as we're talking about schools and administrators and speaking to adults that you trust with your issue of sexual violence, there was a really good question in the chat with mandatory reporting. So if you want this space to be safe and welcoming for you with this adult that you trust that also works at the school, but they are a mandatory reporter, how do you navigate that space if you feel like it's not safe anymore because they have to report?
Mandated reporting is a whole bucket of issues, and it looks different state by state. So we also have to get clear about what we're saying when we're supporting young people, right, based on these laws and these mandates that we have on us as the adults who are supposed to support that. And I think giving feedback to the entities that create mandated reporting is so crucial, especially in this moment, especially what we know about mandated reporting in any sort of CPS. There are definitely moments where young people need to get out of the situation that they're in. And this is, and it can be, a resource. And I've had young people say, thank you so much for doing that. Like, I needed that in that moment. And so I don't want to negate that. We haven't figured out all the ways to hold accountability and to hold safety for young people. At the same way I said, we don't have enough resources. There aren't enough shelters for young people. There aren't enough places to go yet, but there are alternatives. And what's happening right now with mandated reporting is that there's a lot of, there's a lack of, objectivity is not the right way, there's a lot of bias. And so then we're not actually seeing it support in the way that it was meant to. I don't think it's really created for that. And what I would name for folks who are in a system where maybe your school administrators are telling you to do something, or you're worried about losing your license, those sort of things, is really have an honest conversation up front with all your school community about what it is that you have to do as a mandated reporter, and also questioning and querying, what does have to mean? Because a lot of times people think they have to do things, and that's not actually it. And there are steps you can take before it gets there. And usually somebody's telling you something before it even gets to that point that would even be reportable.
Right.
And then also linking with community organizations, because sometimes as that person at the school, you can't be the person to do the kind of work that we're talking about right now. And so that's when a referral can come in, that's when linking can come in, and supporting families. And what we know, especially for young parenting moms, for Black families and Black and Brown families, when they're attached to mandated reporting, when that happens, it's not just, I'm gonna give an example. So experience I had, I'm gonna give a different example. So just, and I'm gonna make it, I'm just thinking about confidentiality. So in this, in this example, if there's a family member, and if you say that there's a domestic violence situation, the young person comes to school and says, this happens to me. You have maybe the dad is the one who's engaging in harm towards the mother, but the mom does not have the means to, and is not prepared to leave that situation. When ACS, when mandated reporting is called, there's potential that that mom is also going to be taken in for not protecting that child. And so we need a better way to ensure that when this is happening, that family is preserved, and also that we're not criminalizing people for their survivorship in these moments. So that's not a complete answer. We're not there yet. There are ways. There are a lot of groups right now, social work groups, groups that are addressing mandated reporting, groups that talk about abolition, who are taking a look at these things and have offered alternatives, what you can do in the moment in order to do this. I know that there are groups out of Chicago and New York. And what I'll do too for this specific question is make sure that it gets back to the folks at Me Too, so those links can be put out to this group. So you can dig in and be able to have those conversations with that community.
Yeah, I know for Georgia, well, in the state of Georgia, when we were organizing there and fighting against legislation, there was also an issue of mandated reporting. So the legislation was that they wanted survivors, in order to get resources and support, if you experience sexual violence in college, you actually had to report to law enforcement. You had to report to your school as well in order to receive resources and support under Title IX. So we actually fought against that legislation and won, because one, police do not have the proper sensitivity training. And two, sexual misconduct is the second highest form of police brutality. So police do have a tendency of triggering survivors again. So yeah, definitely with mandatory reporting, there's always some huge issues with that, because we don't want survivors to feel obligated to report to someone. We just want to make sure that they have resources and support. I think a lot of times with the sexual violence movement in general, we're so focused on carceral feminism and not making sure that this is survivor centered and healing centered and resource centered. So yeah, definitely with mandatory reporting, there definitely has to be deeper discussions around what that looks like and how we can get survivors resources and support outside of that. So we had another question in the chat that I think is very, very important. How can we talk with youth who have experienced sexual harm about knowing the difference between pleasure and boundary crossing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that we're actively moving towards there as a society, right? I think so many of these questions are about like all of the other areas of our world that have to develop so that we can honor where we are and where we need to go. And we're really starting that at JBG this summer, where we have a course around that, right? And teaching Black girls the power of pleasure and what it is to name their body, not after a white male scientist who had no regard for their genitalia, right? but for, in honor of our ancestry and our power, right? And so what does it look like to not understand pleasure through your first sexual experience, but from yourself, right? And so like all of these different things and resources and teachings that we have to do the work to offer to our children and to folks at large, right? And so much of it just comes with unlearning the teachings that told us that we shouldn't discuss these things, and right, undoing the policies that minimize or just fully eradicate sex education, body education, health in schools, right? When we think about health education, at least for mine and most of the youth I interact with, we're thinking about sexually transmitted diseases. We're thinking about a lot of things that have to do with prevention and harm. And when we think about health, it should be holistic, right? It should be about like, what do I need to do to honor my body when it's working the best way? Not how do we just fix harm. But I think so much about our society and every facet is about punitive responses to everything, right? It's not even just when we think about the way that carceral thinking impacts our everyday. It's not just when we think about prisons, it's also in the way we even refer to and learn about our bodies, right? We teach our children not to do something and not to experience pleasure because there's a possibility of harm, right? And there's a possibility of punishment. But what would it look to switch it and switch our perspectives so we're thinking about our wholeness, right? And we're thinking about our wellness.
Absolutely.
And that's what health class should be about, right? Not just about all of the worries around experiencing pleasure for the first time, right? And so I would love for us as a nation to really move forward to embracing bodily autonomy, right? And so, and even when we initially have these conversations with Black girls, a lot of our girls are saying, I don't even feel like I have ownership over my body because this world has told me that my body is too voluptuous, right? That it belongs to someone else, that it's unworthy, right? And so we have to have all of these nuanced and complex conversations that ultimately give youth ownership of themselves in ways that allow them to move through the world on their own terms. And so I could keep ranting forever, but I'll stop there.
I have nothing to add. Yes to all of that. Beautiful.
Absolutely yes to all that, because I think a lot of times people sexualize Black girls. And I love what you said about making sure that they have that body autonomy over their own bodies and they're able to do what they want to do. And we have these conversations with them because I think a lot of times when people think about education around sex or sexual violence, especially with sex ed, they automatically think you're going to talk to your kids about sex, and it's always about STDs and what you can catch and why you shouldn't do it. But what happens if we have those healthy conversations with youth? What happens if we have those honest conversations? What happens if we talk about boundaries? What happens if we talk about body responses and these personal relationships that they have with one another? What happens if we talk about intimate partner violence? Like, what happens if we have those honest conversations? I think when we talk about sex ed, it's just so negative, in a negative light. So what would happen? I definitely echo what you say, Brianna. What happened if we switch it and make it more positive?
We have to let go of the shame and the fear.
Right.
Like that's not, if you think about the Puritan ethic, if you think about the way that this country came into being, sex was used. It was like, cover yourself and be clad and don't appreciate your body. And that's a sin. And then that's how we get witch hunts, like women who were of an essence or who were not fitting into the mold were then persecuted and killed. Right. And it's like, yeah, I'm witchy. And also, this is who I am and this is who I deserve to be. So I think as we start to break away from those norms, it has to also be a conversation. Like this is, again, getting to the work of us adults having to do the work. And then also recognizing that young people starting so young need to be able to know how to name their body parts and use the right words. Need to be able to talk about consent. We talk about hug culture a lot. Do I have to sit on your lap? Those sort of things.
Absolutely.
And this gets back into like, if your culture says you do what that adult says, how do we make more space for us to own our bodies as littles, right? Because you can be as young as 1 and be like, oh, it's too much. You're squeezing me.
Establish boundaries.
And establish boundaries. Yeah, and that's okay. That's okay to talk about. We have to be okay with that. And so
Right.
that again is about the training for the adults and also messaging that. I was thinking about, I'm gonna get the country wrong, but I think it was, I went to a training so many years ago on corporal punishment, and it was like Sweden, I think. They had such high levels of corporal punishment with their families. And so they did a mass public health campaign in the entire country. So they did billboards, they had commercials, they put in law, like the structural laws into place, they did classes for parents, and really took these things to take away this level of, to really understand the impact of when you strike your child, what that looks like in the brain, the fact that it can literally have the child have the same impact of that which someone who's going to war, or that experience. Once you start to be at that point where you're striking your child, then you are having the same thing as being in a fight with someone. And then that response isn't the soothing response that people are expecting from, that children need with their parent or with the caregiver that's in their life. And so they saw the numbers go down because it was a national moment to have accountability for this. And they implemented it into all of these different systems. So not just health, education, housing, all of those things, and said no more. And really saw the numbers go down. And so I think like when we talk about having a big movement, I think when we talk about doing this along the life course, we have to get into the naming and being able to hold this as a national, broad, seeping through everything conversation, and be okay to know that we have some really high numbers when it comes to child sexual abuse in this country. They're atrocious. And we have to be okay with saying like, this is an epidemic.
Right.
And we need to have a major, major solution that looks like this. And there are so many beautiful, wonderful people fighting for that.
Absolutely. So our last question, we are nothing without hope. It supports us in imagining and building toward a future that is not yet visible. What do you see amongst youth that brings you hope? What are your visions for this work?
Sorry, the question just already makes me all giddy on the inside, right? Because that's the most beautiful part of this work, right? When we think about what it means to be a revolutionary, so many of our ancestors note that you cannot be a revolutionary just tearing things down, but you have to actively build up, right? And so when we think about what brings me hope is the brilliance of our youth, their imagination, and how profound and robust it is, right? Their ability to see beyond the confining structures in which they currently live, right? When we think about what Black girl joy and liberation and healing looks like in real terms, right? They tell me what it looks like. They say it looks like them being on the ground and laying out with their palms faced up, right? Them being able to breathe, right? Without qualification or condition, right? Them being able to walk through the space any way they want to, right? And so when we think about Black girls naming what it means to live in their full and authentic truths, that gives me hope in us getting closer and closer to them being able to operationalize and actualize that, right? It looks like Black girl dreaming and defining, right? In the words of our ancestors, right? It looks like a world that asks Black girls before criminalizing Black girls, right? And it looks like a world that allows Black girls to be theorists of their own experiences, right? And I can go on and on and on and on about all these theoretical practices, but I would implore everyone here to ask a Black girl what Black girl liberation looks like to them, and then honor that.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm just excited to be able to learn from young people, to be able to give them some really resources to be able to do what it is that they want to do. And in the ideal, they would just have access to so much more. So the limits that I know that they have on them wouldn't be there, because the brilliance is real. And I don't mean that in a way to put work on young people. I mean that in I know what gets put into other young people that aren't there yet, right?
Right.
And I think everyone should deserve it. And also I want that unconditional love and support for the young people I work with and beyond, to be able to articulate the worlds in which they know, we could be just functioning so differently. And they know that, and they're ready for it. And the urgency that they have is so important. And so for me, working with them continues to keep me urgent as well. Because I think as we get older, we can lean into some comfort. And it doesn't feel like, oh, right, we got to go as hard. And so just being really clear about that. And things I'm excited about for like in the upcoming future, I'm excited for, you know, young people who are going to school, young people who are like, I know I want to be that senator. I know I want to be that principal. I know I want to take over. Just being able to support them in these next few years to get there and try some new things. And there's nothing like watching young people hold a circle for each other.
Absolutely.
And creating their own healing spaces and being like, I'm just here and it's beautiful. And this is everything. So.
Yeah, I think making sure that we provide those resources and support for young people is important. Also getting them involved in the work because we can't do this work without them. But I would like to thank you both for your work, your expertise. I'm all about giving Black women their flowers. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your support. Thank you for allowing us to share this space with you. We really, really appreciate it. Michelle and Brianna, your work does not go unnoticed. I've been following your organizations for quite some time, and I really appreciate the work that you all continue to do and just giving yourselves to this movement. So thank you so much for that. Also, thank you to our audience, our survivor healing community. Thank you to Bria and Angelique for ASL interpretation. Thank you to Kate for live captioning support. Thank you to Melina and Claudio for Spanish interpretation. To Aram and Irisha for healing chat support. Be sure to join us next week, June 30th, for our final conversation in this series, Disruption Across Borders and International Perspective. Thank you all so much for coming out and have a great night.
Thank you so much for hosting us and being in this conversation with us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
The table about to turn. The table about to turn. Yeah. I've been flipping through my timeline, trying to get my mind right. My city cried out. I got to cool down, but I'm under pressure. Cooking with my Crisco. Look at what my fist go. A renegade when I'm in a rage. I got to cool down, but I'm under pressure. I keep my hands dirty, my mind clean. Got a new agenda with a new dream. I'm kicking out the old regime. Liberation, elevation, education. America, you a lie, but the whole world about to testify. I said the whole world about to testify. And the table's about to